The top five, I have it right here, presidential debates ever. Let me know too if some of you guys have either heard of this or maybe you've seen it. So let's go back in time. For as recent as 2000 and as far back as, man, the 1960s. So Richard Nixon, we know him, we love him, we loathe him. I am not a crook. Remember he said that? And also the one guy, I did not have sexual relationships with that woman. So we kind of know if you do your hands like this, you're kind of lying. All right. Richard Nixon. So this was when TV first started airing debates. And he was the first guy, the first candidate to appear in a televised debate. So this was in 1960, and he kind of didn't understand the presence of television. So in television, when it first started, even today, you got to look nice. You can't look disheveled. You can't look like you just came off the street. You have to look really professional because you're going out there to millions of people. So think about this. In 1960, Richard Nixon did not understand the presence of television, but the smooth guy, John F. Kennedy, he did. So when he debated Massachusetts Senator back then, John F. Kennedy. And because of this debate, supposedly, John F. Kennedy won the presidency. So Nixon, because he was unfamiliar with television, and he had some little mistakes over the years running. In 1952, he had a famous speech called Checkers. Get online and look that up. He thought this would have prepared him a little bit, but it did not. So he didn't have a lot of makeup on because it's television. He looked like he hadn't shaved, so he kind of looked pretty much disheveled, all of those. So he looked at the camera, he looked at the audience, he looked at Kennedy, but then he didn't look throughout this. So CBS's anchor, Howard K. Smith, he saw that Nixon's eyes was darting around, and he kind of knew, well, you know what, this guy, he looks kind of shifty. And if the moderator thought that, don't you think the TV audience did? So you got the shifty looking guy that's sweating, no makeup, disheveled, going up against a smooth young guy. I think Kennedy was 44 years old back then. And he talked really smooth and looked good to the television. So because of this, he won that debate, and he eventually won the presidency. Wow. Way back then, right when television was coming. And it's foreshadowed that when you're in front, hopefully yours truly too, looks pretty decent. But I don't know, with streaming now, you don't really have to look decent to get people to watch. But appearances to me, and hopefully to you guys, mean a lot. And with Nixon, didn't mean a lot. With Kennedy, it did. So he won that first television debate and became president of the United States. Chris Christie, speaking of people not getting used to TV and over preparing, and Mark Rubio, 2016, not too long ago. So Marco Rubio's young looking guy, still looks young, but in this debate, he looked like the most over prepared candidate ever. So Florida Senator, this was him in 2016, Marco Rubio, he won this award hands down for being the most over prepared. A lot of people that saw him practicing, and they just kind of told him, well, Marco, why don't you relax a little bit? Don't overdo it. When you ask questions, just don't act robotic. So he was going up against New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Back then, Chris Christie was one of the hottest things since Wonder Bread, I guess. So he had accused Rubio of being a robot because he kept in the debates saying the same speech. And when he kept saying the same speech to Christie, Christie said, there it is. There it is. the memorized 25-second speech because Rubio kept repeating the same thing. He did this for the third time, and he talked about President Obama back then and healthcare. And as Christie kept saying, there it is, there it is. Rubio just kind of shriveled up, started sweating, and lost that debate. And Chris Christie, as you know, is an overpowering man, still is today. But back then, in 2016, he had a lot of power. He had stars to shine. You thought he was going to be the next president. But again, he went up against Trump in later years. And commentator going up against Trump again. And now he's just out there watching the debate like all of us. Speaking of watching, you are watching, keeping it honest. If yours truly, Anthony Parker Alexander, we don't just keep it simple. We don't just keep it real. We keep it honest. And we're talking about the debates and what does it make to win a debate. So you have debates in high school, you have debates in college, and then you have the real debates. And unfortunately, a lot of people, a lot of politicians, they don't want to do debates because some of them aren't good at debates. And then some don't want to do debates because they know, well, you know what? I'm already high in the polls. Why should I even do a debate? Case in point, Donald Trump. He never debated anybody, but he won the debates, which is funny, because he knew that there was nobody going up against him, you know. So are you one for the debates? Does that give you a chance to see somebody and say, well, you know what? I wasn't going to vote for them, but now I think I am. Who's going to be more prepared? Donald Trump or Joe Biden? Some people are looking at this as, well, you know what? Is Joe Biden going to be alert enough to debate when sometimes he can't stand? And will Donald Trump say some things where it's like, well, cut the tape, cut it. This debate coming up between these two are going to be very measured, and we'll talk about that. So, Rick Perry, another smooth presidential candidate, which some people thought had a good chance to win. So, he was a good debate person. He looked good on TV, okay? And in 2011, which was a while back, he was Texas governor. And he announced he was running way late in the game, making his first real public appearance really late. He had won 2 terms in office. And who does that remind you of? DeSantis, very popular guy, like Rick Perry. But once you get to that debate stage or start running, you start sucking. For some reason, whatever got you being that governor for 2 terms, once you go to the big lights and try to run for president, it just doesn't work. So Rick Perry, who was an earlier, I guess, DeSantis, he made a bunch of mistakes. So when he was asked how he would reduce the size of government, he said that he had 3 specific government agencies that he would abolish. So again, he said he had 3 specific agencies that he would abolish. The first 2, the Departments of Commerce and Education. And then the third one, what would he abolish? He just kind of froze. He couldn't remember it. So I'm going to abolish the Department of Commerce. I have 3 I want to abolish. I want to abolish Department of Education. And I want to get rid of I can't remember. But it turned out it was the Department of Education. So, unable to remember this, he said, because he couldn't remember it, oops. Wow. All right. If you're going to have a debate response, oops should be the one that you would say. Or maybe oops, maybe you shouldn't. So you never know. There's another guy, like I said. You have Chris Christie, you have Al Gore, Ed Marco Rubio, Rick Perry, Ron DeSantis, all these guys who look like they would be good presidents, but once the lights shined on them, they sucked. And if you ever heard of the Peter principle is you're in a position and you're taking advantage of that position because you can't go any higher. If you go any higher in that position, you will lose it. So, like, you ever at a job and somebody might be the meanest person ever, and you're wondering how did they ever get that position? Because they're milking that position, and you know if they went somewhere else, they wouldn't have that power. That's the Peter principle. Look it up. Let me know what you think of that. Or maybe somebody at your job where you could be the person that's in your highest position, and you're not going to leave that position because you know if you leave that position, you're not going to find a graveyard job where you're over everybody and you get so many things and you love with yourself. Because if you get another position, you won't have that. So think about that. And that's kind of like some of these politicians. So Al Gore and George Bush, year 2000. And if you remember this debate, they kept walking in front of each other. I think it was Al Gore kept walking towards George Bush and then he'd walk away. He'd walk like he was about to hit him or run into him and then he'd turn. I just thought it was just a too close debate. So back then, Al Gore, he was a vice president of Bill Clinton, 2 terms. So when they're doing debates, there's no points in scoring for debates. There are no judges other than the general public, and then the commentators. So you're trying to come off as the smartest person doing this on this debate. So Texas Governor George W. Bush, he beat then Vice President Al Gore in the important first debate of 2000, which many believe won him the election. So Gore seemed to have won the debate, though. So he won it, even though, like I said, Bush won the presidency, Gore won the debate. Gore had all the answers, but he appeared to be kind of pompous and like he knew everything, often rolling his eyes and making noises whenever George Bush said something. So Gore, that's what I thought. He got into the weeds. He started talking crazy about Medicaid and Social Security. He said he wanted to put it in a lockbox. And he mentioned this about 6 times, but nobody knew what he meant. And throughout the debate, he was also prone to exaggeration. So even though he won this, as far as substance and intelligence, he didn't win the presidency. And then, you had the Florida, the Chad votes and everything. So you go back to different elections and you wonder what would have happened if some of these presidents had won or continued. You go back to JFK. If JFK had not gotten assassinated, what would have happened? Okay. If Al Gore had won, what would have happened? If Jimmy Carter had won against Reagan, what would have happened? If Donald Trump hadn't won, what would have happened? If Joe Biden hadn't won, what would have happened? Now we have Joe Biden and Donald Trump again, depending on who wins, what will happen. So, Mike Pence. Now we know he ran for president. We don't know why. You talk about a guy, right-hand man, but then after the insurrection, thrown under the bus, who knows? We know that Donald Trump won't pick Mike Pence as his presidential candidate. So let's go back to the 2020 debate. Mike Pence, all right? Not one of the most interesting guys in the world. When he was doing his debate, and I can't remember who he debated, but if you do remember, as he was debating, there was a fly flying around his head. And Mike Prince has white hair, so you can kind of see the fly. It's almost, that's a bee right there, but flying around his head. And rather than ignoring it, okay, he could have made a joke about it. The joke could have been, the least likely voters I find are oddly attracted to hairspray. Now, whether that would have been funny, I don't know. So when he didn't talk about the fly, instead of people talking about the debate, they talked about his fly. And I don't mean on his pants, the fly flying in his head. And last but not least, James Stockdale, 1992. Never heard about this. I'm just reading this now. So this beats all the other gaps that I just read to you about. So independent candidate, Ross Perot, if you remember him, he was a third party candidate way back then in 92. I think he got 11% of the vote back then. So he picked Vice Admiral James Stockdale. And in 1992, with little notice or preparation, he ended up on the debate stage with Al Gore and Dan Quayle. So you got Al Gore, you got Dan Quayle, you got Ross Perot, and you got James Stockdale. So Ross Perot is no. Al Gore is no. Dan Quayle is no. James Stockton, his first words, I kid you not, when he gets to the mic, was who am I? And why am I here? Bam. Good selling points for VP presidential candidate pick. So who do you think you won this? Al Gore and Dan Quayle? Or James Stockdale and Ross Perot. So those are some of the worst presidential debates of all time. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there have been some that I missed. Oh yeah, well and one of the best ones was if I'm correct, Ronald Reagan. And there you go again. And one of the worst was I'm trying to remember, dealing with JFK, and where the candidate says, I know JFK, and you're no JFK. I think I got that right. Speaking of right, you're right here watching Keeping It Honest with yours truly, Anthony Parker Alexander. Our email address is parkerman2011@gmail.com, parkerman2011@gmail.com. Phone number, leave a message, 216-702-3718, 216-702-3718. You can go to our Patreon page. You can contribute, help us